Welcome back to the Baseball Odds Watch podcast. Eddie Virgil, Chris Gambino. We're back with another divisional breakdown as we continue through this preseason and the regular season charges forward. Today's the NL East episode. This division changed this offseason, but I think it started at the end of last season.
Oh yeah, and it becomes a three-team race now. I think definitely. I mean, the odds show that, right? Three teams that are projected to be at the top of this division are all really close in terms of the odds of divisional odds or World Series odds, which is very interesting. It's been, I think, the talk of baseball as well, specifically one team, but despite the other two teams that are part of this three-team race not doing much in the offseason, Eddie, I almost feel like those two other teams are really poised to make the playoffs again and are arguably better than the team that made the most noise, the Mets. I mean, we'll talk about this, but there's a lot more to talk about than people might think, even though one team's really been in the headlines this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too heavy on the big move that was made. I'm not too heavy on that. That's going to be this huge difference maker. But when we look at the World Series odds for NL East teams, the top team right now is Atlanta. The Braves are the third favorites to win the World Series, plus 950. Then it's the Phillies. They're fourth favorites at plus 1,000. So they're literally right behind the Braves. And then the Mets are third favorites at plus 1,100. So they're fifth favorites. So the NL East has the 3, 4, 5 preseason World Series favorites. That's crazy to me that one division is sort of stacked up right behind each other. I mean, obviously, then it jumps to the Nationals and Marlins, who are way down in the bottom third. But three teams in the top five to win the World Series, and the likelihood is, I don't know. You still got to get past the Dodgers.
You got to get past the Dodgers, and you got to get past the inevitable wild card team that's going to get there and probably be the sneaky young team. You were big on the Cincinnati Reds last week. Could they be that team?
Mhm.
Listen, that's what I'm saying is you could win this division. You could be the number one team. You could win 100 games. It's all fine and good. But how's that postseason going to go for you? That's I believe what's most important is I think these teams got to figure out even more so than winning the division. It's getting in the playoffs, being strong enough for October because two of these three teams have had playoff woes over the past couple of years, the Phillies and Braves, right? And the Mets are coming in. They had the magical offseason last offseason. How's now they got the pressure on them. They have the expectations. How are they going to respond to that? So these three teams, I think it's how they can respond to either getting eliminated in the playoffs or how they can respond to the pressure. Because the National League is really packed. I think more so than the American League, and this is
Mm.
definitely the best race for the division. I think in Major League Baseball. If I'm being completely honest with you, Eddie, I don't think there's a three-team race as special as this one, right? These three teams that you can expect, I think, to get at least over 90 wins. I don't think you're seeing that in Major League Baseball.
I still make my argument for the NL Central, but I see your point, especially when I look at these odds. Let's look at the divisional odds and get started here. The Braves are the favorites right now at plus 135, followed by the Phillies at plus 180. The Mets plus 210 to win the division. And then obviously we have this giant drop off to the Nationals at plus 1,000. And then the Marlins way down at plus 25,000. So let's start with the favorites, who are the Phillies. Or no, I'm sorry, the favorites who are the Braves, rather, plus 135. They were the wild card team last year, one of the wild card teams that came out of this division. It came down to literally a day after the season ended because luckily they had that rain out series with the Mets that they ended up splitting and saying goodbye to the D-backs and then, going on to make a very unceremonious and short playoff run. But my thing, to me, this is accurate. This tracks. The Braves should be the favorites to win the National League East. I don't think that the other teams in the National League East are as good as them roster wise, but also last year was a down year for them. And they still ended up in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Chris Sale won a Cy Young in a season that Spencer Strider was injured and Max Fried was injured for most of the year. So they needed a pitcher, and Chris Sale stepped up. And then Reynaldo Lopez, this was his first year as a starter, and he stepped up. He was dominant. And then they had Schwellenbach come out of nowhere, and he steps up, and he's pretty good. He looks like a solid 3 in your rotation kind of guy, in a rotation that he's maybe number 5, maybe not at all. So on top of Ronald Acuna Jr. going down very early and out for the whole season, Ozzy Albies spent a good amount of time on the injured list. Michael Harris Jr. spent a good amount of time on the injured list. It was like this team was nothing but canes and crutches. And still, they made the playoffs. That was their down year because then on top of that, Austin Riley wasn't having the best year. He had a good year, but not the best year. Matt Olson definitely had a down year. What happens when everyone's healthy? What happens if everyone's healthy and they're firing on all cylinders? This team becomes unstoppable, and we've seen what they look like. The other thing to me is we're going to get to the Phillies in a minute, but this is the only team in this division that's won a World Series in the last 10 years. It was going on 6 years ago, so still technically 5 years ago that they won. This is the best team in this division in my eyes.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with you. Now, I remember, before the show, I was telling you I was almost shocked by it, but taking some time to think about it, look at their roster, the Braves realized this offseason that less is more. They don't, right? They lost Max Fried. They have internal options that they can go with. Schwellenbach, as you mentioned, Reynaldo Lopez, who took a big step forward. They also lost Charlie Morton as well, so they're losing guys with postseason pedigrees as well, which is
Yeah.
a little concerning. And they're going more with these younger pitchers. But again, that's how they did it before, right? They developed Max Fried originally. They had a guy named Michael Soroka a few years back who never really panned out. But right, they've done this before, and they're just doing it again. Uh, they're expecting these guys to come back. Spencer Strider was a huge loss for them last season. I mean, this is a guy who people were expecting to win the Cy Young last year. He goes down a couple weeks into the season as part of that whole pitcher epidemic with all those other guys, Shane Bieber and all these other pitchers that needed surgery and were out for the rest of the year. So they should be getting him back. Austin Riley and Matt Olson, they're expecting big years from. So when you lock into these guys and you have this core like the Braves do, you gotta go with your guys, right? And you gotta
Yeah.
expect them to perform. And so they don't need to go out and sign everyone in free agency. I like the signing of Jurickson Profar. I thought that was a nice smaller move, but a guy who was really good last year for the Padres. That was just a
Yeah.
nice, baseball move. And so they did get better. They're getting guys back from injuries. Acuna should be coming back during the season at some point, and that's obviously, I mean, he's as good of a player as you're going to find in this game. So this team is fantastic, and I think, again, in a way, Eddie, even though the storylines have been with another team in this division, and the vibes may not be all there, at least from the media for the Braves, maybe that's a good thing for them.
That's okay.
Yep,
Yeah, that's okay. You play a little bit of pressure-free baseball. You play a
exactly.
little bit of no expectation baseball. I'm all right with that. I think anybody would be all right with
'Cause
that. I
that's how
think
they won the World Series. I
exactly,
mean,
exactly. That's the best thing I think the Braves looked at that Juan Soto move and were like, "Good." Yes. I mean, some Yankee fans felt that way, right? It was like, all right, we don't have to deal with the pressure of having the big money player this season. And for whatever reason, people expect it to work out right away, and it usually never does. But I think the one thing that doesn't go right for the Braves year after year is the Brian Snicker strategy. And I wrote it down in the notes because you can't tell me that these injuries to guys don't have something to do with just wear and tear, right? You're running these guys through as many games as you can, right? You're not playing matchups, you're not platooning guys. You're just saying, all right, we have 162 games. I expect you to play 162 games. Now, granted, we don't want to do what like they're doing in the NBA and have a load management system or whatever. Like people are paying to see guys, they should be playing. If you're not injured, you should be playing. But guys need days off. I get it that the schedule kind of naturally gives you some road trip days and this and that, but guys need to rest on a day that they were maybe supposed to be playing for this reason. You have a guy like Ronald Acuna Jr. who already tore a ligament, and then you play him every day, and then the next year, of course, he gets injured because that's just how the body works sometimes. Everything else has to work a lot harder to kind of compensate, even if it's in the slightest, it's a lot. So I think that's the only problem for the Braves is if it's not an injury that hurts them because guys just are playing and playing and playing, then maybe it's just getting tired and running out of steam at the end of the year.
Right, and I think maybe that's another reason why they considered Profar because he's more of a utility guy. He was playing a lot of left field, so I'm assuming he'll play a lot of outfield until they get Acuna back. But say Matt Olson's struggling or gets hurt, now you got a guy Profar could probably play first. Someone could play first, right? I think that was another thing they tried to do this offseason, bring in guys who could play multiple positions, and right, you look at the outfield situation again, Michael Harris, Kellenic as well, trying to piece together the outfield, the pitching. They realized maybe we don't just need Max Fried to be our ace. We could go with these young guys we have in the system and build a rotation that we're confident in within. Um, they again, less is more, but depth is very key through getting through a season. That's something they didn't have last season, and I think that's something they prioritize this off season. Um, and hopefully it works out for them. Again, hopefully it works out for them because again, they're expecting Strider to come back. They're expecting Acuna to come back, but they also need some big performances from some guys within the team as well. I mean, Matt Olson just has to be better, plain and simple, Eddie. He's got to be
Yeah.
much better than that. You can't go from hitting 54 home runs to struggling as mightily as he did last season.
Yeah.
Really wasn't
Yeah.
last season.
It,
So
it's
guys have
tough.
to come back.
Yeah, you need some consistency out of your power bats, and especially like, I mean, that's a team that gave up essentially Freeman to be able to get Matt Olson. Wasn't their fault. We ended up finding out. I'm not going to put my tinfoil hat on, but it kind of is what it is. That's your job now, and you've got to fill that role. So let's move on to Philadelphia and a team that mystifies me year after year. They're plus 180 second favorites to win the division after they ran away with it last year, and that was crazy to watch. But again, you had a hurt Braves and a surging Mets team, so it kind of opened up the floor for the Phillies. Plus, they had a great year out of the lefty and uh, Ranger Suarez that they kind of didn't expect most of the way, and so plus Zach Wheeler is always dominant. Now, then they go lose to the Mets in the playoffs. And this is like a team that, in my mind, I don't want to say is regressing, but there's a hump and they're not getting over it. They went 93 and 69. They were one of the best teams in baseball. Now they went and added Jordan Romano and Max Kepler. Fine. Did you really need Kepler? Maybe not. You already have a really solid lineup, but I don't get it. I don't get this team at all. They should have a ring. They should have maybe more than one, but they should have at least the one by now. And it seems like since they went to the World Series against the Astros, they haven't gone back to the World Series. And now last year, again, another unceremonious and sort of early exit for a really good team coming out of the NL East. So, do you have an answer here? Because I really don't know where the
I
problem lies with
I
this team.
think I have an explanation, and I think it's because realistically, Eddie, they've rode their guys as far as they can, right?
Hmm.
Losing to all right, 2022. We'll take you back to 2022. No one
Yeah.
expected, I didn't expect that team to make the playoffs, let alone win a playoff series, let alone go all the way to the World Series to game 6 of that series, right?
Mhm.
So, all right, how could we improve this? They go out and they bring in Trey Turner. And
Yeah.
that's an obvious move. Now they're one of the top teams in the National League. They're expected to get back there. Okay, they do. They eliminate the Braves again in 2023. They get to game 6 of the NLCS against the Diamondbacks, who no one expected to get there. And the Diamondbacks walk back into Philly and win game 6 and 7 in two of the
Yeah.
prettiest games I've ever seen. There's no way to bounce back from that. There's no way to get better from that. You're right. You put yourself in a position where you should have swept that team in the championship series, and ultimately they just came out on top. That's one of the craziest things I've ever witnessed on a baseball field is watching the Diamondbacks win games 6 and 7 of that series.
Yeah. I agree.
The Phillies don't do much that offseason. They get back to 2024, they cruise to the division again. They lose to the Mets in the playoffs. Really, what can you do? I mean, at this point, what can you do? And I think that's why the vibes aren't so great heading into 2025, and they didn't really do much because what can you really do, Eddie? I mean, you
Yeah.
run into two red hot teams in the postseason at the wrong time, and that's what the Dodgers have done before. Right? The narrative's completely changed that the Dodgers won the World Series, but that was the narrative with the Dodgers is they ran into the Braves, the Padres, the Nationals back in 2019. All these teams they've run into those teams at the wrong time. They're the notable playoff chokers, and ultimately they win a World Series in 2020, and then they win the World Series last year. So I feel like not that they believe less is more, but it's almost like what can you really do to improve this roster that much? Because again,
Mhm.
they cruise to the regular season, and this is about as good of a playoff team as you can put together with the amount of
Yeah.
bats they have. They have all you need is really 3 relievers and you're good, and 3 starters and you're good, and they have that. So this is as good of a team as you're gonna find. It's just they're constantly riding that team to the postseason and expecting their guys to get it done. And so I think
Yeah.
it's gonna be a good season for
I
them.
I agree with you. I have no, you know, I don't have an answer here, but I do feel like this team has been playing together for a while,
Yeah,
and it's only gotten you so far. So what do you do? Do you blow it up, but that puts you maybe in a rebuild? Or do you find spaces to, you know, improve, right? Like
yeah,
time also means age. You're not gonna get any better, right?
no,
Kyle Schwarber can't reinvent himself. He's your DH. So, okay, fine. JT Realmuto, maybe you can move him over to first, but you already did that with Bryce Harper, so that's gone. Trey Turner eventually is going to have to do something. Speed is the first thing to go, and speed is kind of what makes Trey Turner as dynamic as he is. So it's starting to go already, and it's only down from here for him. You wanted to get rid of Alec Bohm, you didn't. So now it's kind of awkward in that locker room a little bit because you've also got guys like Edmundo Sosa and whatever. Um, the bullpen is really good on paper. Bullpens are bullpens. They're fleeting. That's an easy fix if it's not that good though. That was a big issue for them last season, but it was something that they kind of breezed past and still dominated the league and the division. But the wall is in front of you. And at this point, maybe it's just mental. Like
Maybe.
maybe you just don't know that you can do it or not. Maybe you're trying to muster up the energy of a winner of a champion, but you just can't. And you feel like your best chance was when you were in the World Series against Houston, and then Jordan Alvarez played Steph Curry and said goodnight to you. How do you change that though? Do you
Yeah.
bring in like a psychiatrist or something? Do you need a new manager? I I don't know what the change has to be, but something has to. I mean, I love this team. I love this team. I love this roster so much so that I could never pick them like an MLB the Show because I'm like, no, it's going to be too easy.
You
I'm
know
going
what
to
you
win.
do?
But what do you
You know what you do? You trade for Vladimir Guerrero Jr.
do?
That would make things better, huh?
Okay,
That'd be
but
great.
who do you trade him? Who do you trade for? Because in my mind, if you're going to do that, you got to trade Schwarber because where's Vladdy going to play?
Yeah.
Do you trust him to be a third baseman again? All right, well then
Yeah.
Alec Bohm's got to go,
Well,
fine, but most likely he's going to be at first, and then you got to move Harper.
but you're right, you bring up a good point, right? Alec Bohm, I was thinking maybe it was a good thing they didn't trade him because he's used to playing with these guys, but yeah, it's awkward. It's like Nolan Arenado, but 10 times worse because at least Arenado is like a Hall of Famer. Alec Bohm is now he's your third baseman, and he's coming in. He already has the famous quote of "I hate this
I
place,"
hate this
and
place.
it
Yeah,
seems like he was fixing that. And now what's happening? Now they don't want you, and now it's just a weird situation. They also lost Jeff Hoffman, who was a really good reliever for them last year, and they're replacing him with
right, but they got Romano.
I mean, so essentially they make that trade because he was from the Blue Jays and Hoffman goes to the Blue Jays. That's I think the Phillies lose that trade if I'm being completely honest
Really?
with you. Yeah, he's Hoffman's way better in my opinion. Rama was a little injury prone, although he's good. But I think it's a great bullpen. Don't get me wrong, but it's just like the vibes aren't great. Um,
Mm,
and so yeah, I'm kind of kidding and saying they're going to get Vladdy, although you don't know they could maybe be a favorite in the trade deadline. Anything could happen, but it feels like they need that, right? Because again, even though one thing I didn't mention with the Dodgers a couple minutes ago, right? Yeah, it was huge that they brought in Shohei Otani before the season. That was a big boost for them to get to the World Series.
yeah.
It feels like the Phillies need that. It feels like they need that kind of big boost, but oddly, in a way, Eddie, I feel like it's a similar situation with the Braves where they don't have as much pressure on them because,
Yeah.
again, they're not the talk of the offseason. The vibes aren't great in Philly.
Mm,
Philly fans themselves, Philly fans are nuts, right?
yeah.
They see they see their team do nothing in the offseason. They think they're losing 100 games. Wait till they realize, wait, we might actually have a playoff team here. So
I see, but the problem is though, I disagree there. I think the pressure's on in Philly because the fans don't expect anything from you. Because all of a sudden you're like you're gonna look around and wonder why they're not behind you as they were, even though you feel like you've accomplished things, right?
I feel
You
like
haven't done what you were supposed to.
I feel like that's there now, though. I feel like that pressure's been on them
Yeah,
recently.
but that pressure is gonna be from within the organization, though. Like the Braves comparison, the Braves I feel like knew once Acuna and Strider weren't in on that roster anymore for the rest of the year. It was like, all right, we're gonna get what we can get out of this team. The Phillies have had no excuse. The Phillies have had no excuse. You can't even say, well, the Dodgers, because you didn't even play them. You lost to the Mets. You didn't make it there. So you're regressing. You're as time passes, you're getting less and less far. And the only thing left for you to do now is just not make it to the playoffs at all. At that point, then it's like, okay, maybe they trade a few guys and then there's no pressure because then there's no expectation. But right now, I think this is the pressure year. And you got to play an even tougher Dodgers if you do make a run.
Only thing is, I think the only thing that separates them from the Braves is because again, we're talking Braves had before this season, these guys got hurt, they didn't have much pressure on them. Braves had a ton of pressure on them in 2022 and 2023, and they lost to the Phillies both years. And then they come back. The only thing that separates them from the Phillies is the Phillies are kind of aging, and the Braves were younger, so you expected those guys to be back. Acuna wasn't going anywhere. Olsen, these guys weren't going anywhere free until now, until he became a free agent. The only thing that the Phillies have against them, and this is where I think the only pressure would lie, is that these guys are getting older. Real Muto is getting older, right? I remember Real Muto was the best catcher in the game. He's very good still, but now no one's really
Yeah.
talking about him. Turner, as you mentioned, the speed's going. Harper, Schwarber, but I think they have enough in them to make a run this season and to still be a competitive team next year. Um, Maybe they do need a Vladdy. Listen, because again, maybe they need that younger player to be the face of the team because these guys are going out, right? I think they need some young dynamic players. I think that's really all they need. I just don't know where they find that within their roster. But I just feel like not that there's no pressure on them, but it feels like they're not the talk of the National League like they were just a year ago. And maybe that could work out to their advantage because I think they're almost being underestimated a little.
Fair, fair, underestimated, but definitely not pressure free.
No, no,
Definitely not
no.
pressure free. I don't think that that's the
Yeah.
way to kind of describe it. I think the pressure's on in Philly for sure. So let's talk pressure then. Let's move on to the Mets because plus 210, third favorites to win the division. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that part. 89 and 73, we know what they did last year, right? They went on the magical, oh my God, grimace, whatever else trending hot to a run that they made. They lost to the Dodgers. I don't know that anyone really had an expectation that they would beat the Dodgers. That was pressure-free baseball.
Yeah.
You thought they would beat the Dodgers? Or
I thought that they were gonna win the World Series.
okay, did you think they would or did you expect them to? Because there's a difference.
Oh, no, I didn't expect, but I
Okay.
thought they would.
So I don't think anyone
No,
expected it, right?
uh-uh.
But now, um, little different though. They signed Juan Soto. They got the big fish. Steve Cohen went and he got it done, right? I love that for Mets fans. I honestly do. I'm not one of those Yankee fans that's like, oh, the Mets suck.
Yeah,
Sometimes it's just the Mets, but sometimes like go for it, bro. I wish you the best. I'm a baseball fan above everything. They also get Minter and they get Holmes, and they're converting Holmes to a starter. They make the re-signing of Pete Alonso. They also signed Jesse Winker. That was a firework for them. They lost Severino, and this is where I see it all kind of fall apart for them because it's pitching that wins. We know Juan Soto's the best hitter. Your lineup wasn't your problem when you made your run last year. It was actually one of the few things that worked for you. You made these Dodger pitchers that seemed superhuman almost all year. You made them look human. You made them look mortal with your lineup. Now you make a great addition for it, but if you ask me, it wasn't the addition that you needed to make. I think Corbin Burns was the move you really wanted to make instead of like a Pete Alonso, right? Because who's your pitcher? Who's your ace? You re-signed Sean Manaea. When I see Sean Manaea, I see Jordan Montgomery. I see a guy that had one really good year and it took his team through the playoffs and they did great, but that's it. Like you can't take Sean Manaea off who he was last season and say this is who we're getting. You're getting the guy that was on the Oakland A's and then bounced around the league. And I get it. He looked like a demon when you saw that game with the Phillies that they had the pitching machine all the way to the left and we're trying to figure out the arm slot. Fine. You think that's not going to get figured out in an off season? Okay, and then you let Severino go behind him. I mean, granted, the A's made a hell of an offer on Luis Severino, one that he couldn't refuse, you know what I mean? But I don't think yeah, I had to channel the Godfather for that one, but I don't think that this Mets team is the team to watch in the NL East this year still.
Yeah, look, and you're absolutely right. I actually agree with the way you're looking at it. That I didn't even think about it that way, that it's the pitching is kind of a problem. That's something we're not considering. I think the only thing with me is David Stearns has such a pedigree of pitching in Milwaukee, especially building internal options, that I almost feel like his decision to get Clay Holmes to convert him to a starter is like it's like the word of God. Like it's gonna work out. It feels like because he has such a I mean, he did it with so many guys. He developed Corbin Burns, Brandon Woodruff, all those guys, Peralta. Basically, everyone in Milwaukee right now is David Stearns' product. Where my concern lies with the Mets, because again, I'm also a Yankee fan. Don't hate the Mets. Don't really care. I view them as just another team. I think they're the Mets. I don't have any hatred towards them, so this isn't bias. But
Before you continue, I want to say hi to everybody watching on TikTok Live and Instagram Live. While this podcast has been going on, I've been figuring this app out to get us on live on those apps, and we're live. We're live on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. Welcome back to the show. Eddie Virgil, Chris Gambino, and we are in the middle of talking Mets. Anyway, continue, Chris.
where my concern lies with the Mets is I feel like they rode the magic to get to the postseason, and it got them kind of through the postseason to the National League Central. They're sorry, the National League Championship Series.
Mm,
Um, you can't expect that to return this season. And so, again, you write down on the rundown that they lose Luis Severino. They also lose Harrison Bader. They lose Jose Iglesias.
yeah, that's a bit. I think that last one, the Jose Iglesias loss, it's gonna be so much bigger than they think. You
Right.
know,
That's
the
exactly
guy brought life to the dugout.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. And I'm not saying Harrison Bader is had a better player than Juan Soto at all. That's not what I'm saying. I take Juan Soto 11 times out of 10 over Harrison Bader. Absolutely. What I am saying though is he brought kind of that magic. He was a contributor to that magic. You bring
Yeah,
back Jesse Winker. Here's the thing though. I don't even think bringing those guys back. Like if you did say they were like, okay, we're gonna bring back Iglesias and Bader, and we're not gonna get Soto. That would also be the bad decision, right?
yeah,
You have to capitalize on that magic when it comes to you. And that's something the 2015 Mets didn't do. That's something the 2017 Yankees didn't do. The 2021 Giants, the 2023 Diamondbacks, these teams, right? They have that magical run in the postseason. It's kind of a thing that happens to teams every now and again. Some teams capitalize on it, like the Nationals in 2019, Braves in 2021. When that comes to you, it's really hard to replicate it the next year. And so now
yeah.
a lot of pressure is on the Mets, but you take away the magic because you can't expect that to return. You can't expect yourself. You can't expect your team to have a magical run to the playoffs. Now you add Juan Soto, who's an excellent signing. He's close of a short thing as you're finding in this game because he's done
Mm,
it in 3 different cities now, and he's performed in all of them, including New York, and I'll bring the Yankees to the World Series. So now you go from lovable team with all these bits and gimmicks and having fun and no expectations and playing with house money. And now you bring in Juan Soto. Now I think Eddie, there is not a team in Major League Baseball with more pressure on them than the Mets. If I'm being completely
mm,
honest with you, I'm not saying they're the best. I'm not saying they're the best team in this division. I'm not saying they're the best team in the National League. But I
right.
feel like the narrative has almost been just because we brought in Juan Soto, now we're expected to compete with the Dodgers. Who's to say you're even getting to face the Dodgers next season? You know what I mean? Who's to say they can't? I'm not. Mets could win 100 games next season, get swept by the Cincinnati Reds in the division series. That could very well be something we're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to
Look,
happen.
I agree that the pressure is higher this year than last year for the Mets. Most pressure in baseball, 100% disagree. I think they've got, when I think about it, maybe fourth most pressure behind the Phillies, like I mentioned earlier, behind and then the obvious other two, like, they don't even have the most pressure in New York.
Really?
I don't think they've got more pressure to win than the Yankees. Not at all.
No, I think I'm sorry to interrupt you. I really wanted to mention this now that you say that. I think the Mets got more pressure because again, I think a lot of people are saying, the Yankees lose Soto. That's a huge loss.
Uh-huh.
These guys that they brought in could all struggle, and this team is gonna be like 2023 all over again for the Yankees. I think the
But
Mets got more pressure on them, man.
but after the way the Yankees lost, I think now the pressure's definitely on. Like, you gotta win. You have to win. And you made the moves you made. Sure, they look like more temporary moves than permanent, but I think the pressure's still way higher because you've made these sort of obvious moves. Because you also went and are negotiating with Aaron Boone for an extension because Brian Cashman does have that pressure. So I think they have the most pressure. And again, in the National League, I think the obvious team that's got the most pressure is the Dodgers. It doesn't matter that they
Fun.
won last year. It's that they made all these moves after winning. You can't go and sign everybody and their mother and then expect to not have pressure. All the Mets did was go and get Juan Soto. I think if they would have gotten Juan Soto and like a Blake Snell or a Corbin Burns or, any other big free agent where it's kind of obvious that now the Mets are in win now mode, I think the entire league puts the pressure on the Mets. I think we New Yorkers are putting pressure on the Mets, but the reality is like they've got a lot of time to win.
No,
And
absolutely.
I think in the shadow of last year, you may feel like they should be under some kind of pressure, but when you win with house money and then make a move, now you've got a little bit of time because now it's like, all right, we kind of know what we can do now. Lindor's not going anywhere. But when you bring up now that I brought up Lindor, I think he's got pressure. I think he's playing under a lot of pressure because you're already the number two guy in New Balance. You've been the number one guy in the Mets organization because Pete Alonso just doesn't have the character to be the number one guy. And now Juan Soto's there. So it's going to be Lindor's the captain of this ship, but everybody knows that that team's going to run through Juan Soto. So I think that there's going to be pressure ball on Lindor on top of coming off the year that everyone thought in Queens, he's got to be the MVP. Newsflash, he didn't need to be the MVP, but the pressure's on Lindor. The rest of this team, even Juan Soto, who just signed a deal, they don't have pressure. They're playing free ball. They're like, we're here now. Like, what can we do? We know what we can do. Do we have to do it again this year? No. Steve Cohen's plan is a long-term one. He's going to turn that place into its own metropolis. So I don't think that I don't think that the Mets as an organization have that pressure. Definitely Lindor, though.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you why I think the Mets have more pressure the most. That's because I'll take it back to 2017 with the Yankees. The Yankees go on this run in the postseason, make it to ALCS Game 7. Mets Game 6 of the championship series against the Dodgers. What do the Yankees do in that offseason? Bring in Giancarlo in. All of a sudden, everyone's expecting. All the Yankee fans are expecting them to
Mm,
win. I don't know if it's
yeah.
a Yankees fan thing. I don't know if that's what it is. All of a sudden, the Yankees have all this pressure on them. The Astros are still better. They didn't get any pitchers. The Yankees. The Astros got Garrett Cole. The Red Sox won the World Series next year. The Dodgers are still add more pressure. But the Yankees, if for some reason it felt like the Yankees had the most pressure on them, I feel like. And by the way, it was Cashman who had the championships, not just one championship. Quote: they were expected to win over a multitude of years, but it felt like they had the most pressure on them because they made that big fish move in Stanton. And I think the Mets have the same thing right now with Juan Soto. I think it's absolutely Juan Soto's team, though, without a doubt. I think it's
Mm.
absolutely his team. I think he's going to sell the most jerseys. I think he separates himself from most players in Mets history because the Mets have. When was the last time the Mets really had a top three player in Major League Baseball heading into a season? I mean, really, if I'm being completely honest with you.
this year. I mean, Lindor almost won MVP.
Okay, but
But
is
before that,
Lindor
no, I get your point. Like it's been a while since the Mets have been
like, he's
the
just an
team with the
upper
eyes
higher
on them.
echelon player than they've ever had.
Yeah,
And I have hotter takes with how good I think Juan Soto is gonna be. I don't I mean, I've alright, I'll say it. I've
I was gonna say
I've
you're on
said
a podcast.
I've said on other podcasts that I think Juan Soto, the moment he signed that contract, he immediately became the best player the Mets have ever had. Because he's as
Mm,
close of a sure thing as you're ever gonna find in this game. You know he's gonna be a perennial all-star with the Mets. You know he's gonna be an MVP finalist or at least top 5 in the MVP for the next decade. The Mets have never had this. You
yeah,
list the top greatest Mets in history. Tom Seaver, may he rest in peace, amazing pitcher. He didn't even finish his career with the Mets. He was an all-star with the Reds and got his 300th win with the White Sox. I mean, David
yeah.
Wright, Jose Reyes, Carlos Beltran, all very good players, but Juan Soto is just a higher tier of player that they've never had. And I think he's undoubtedly the face of this team. And I don't know. I don't think Lindor has pressure on him. I kind of disagree with you there because I think Lindor welcomes Soto with open arms. I think he's just happy, like you said. I think they're happy to play with each other. I
Mm,
still think they got a lot of pressure on them as a team because again, I'm not excusing all the stuff I heard as a Yankee fan in 2017. I think Judge and Stanton were happy to play with each other. All of a sudden, they're expected to win the World Series, even though they were building for the future. I think it's the exact same thing with the Mets. I think these two are excited to play with each other, but they got more pressure on them. I mean, and the pressure's only going to get higher because they're going to be a favorite for Vladdy next season as well. So the pressure's only going
mhm.
to get higher. I think it's Soto's team as of now, though, if I'm being
Yeah,
completely.
I think we have Vladdy as a Met, and I think the Yankees get Murakami as a Yankee. So it's gonna be interesting for sure to watch how the Mets develop in the long term. But I'm convinced that this year is 100% not the year. And I don't think that if you're a Mets fan
Very well could be.
watching this, that you should go into this season with this mentality of we're champs this year, championship loading. Like I don't even think you have the best chance to win one this year in New York, let alone in your division, let
Totally agree.
alone your side of the league. So speaking of no chance,
Can we just keep
the
talking about
Nationals.
the Mets?
Huh?
Can we just keep talking about the Mets? We
I
have way
I
more to talk about than these guys. These
I know. I just but you know what though? Look, the Nationals 71 and 91. They completely missed the playoffs. I liked this team last year. I liked their roster. I liked what they
they're
were
cute little
doing.
roster.
I mean, there's things to like. And now Patrick Corbin's not on the team anymore.
Good.
And I think that makes them better. Addition by subtraction kind of thing. Um, I've always been high on the Nationals. They're a young team. They've got young talent. It got a little weird there though, because the ownership, the front office is a weird one. They didn't want to let Strasburg retire before this season started. Last season started, I should say. They didn't want to let him retire. That's the weirdest thing you can do. The guy's trying to say, "Hey, I don't want to. I can't do this anymore." And you're like, "Nah, do it." It doesn't make any sense. So then that whole thing happens, and then at the end of last season, in a year that you're not even close, right? You're not sniffing a wild card anymore, right? There was a point in the season, kind of midway, where the Nationals got real hot, and people thought they could make a run at that last lowest wild card spot, but it kind of disappeared real quick. It was a fleeting thing. You're not even close. CJ Abrams is depressed out of his mind. So he goes to gamble, or maybe he has a gambling addiction. I don't know, but obviously something's not right. Instead of finding a way to hone him in, maybe get him helped, maybe hug him essentially as an organization because in the reality, in the grand scheme of things, this guy is supposed to be the future of your organization. He was your only all-star. You throw him back in AAA when there's a game left. I think they didn't even have any more games left. They just did it to do it. Or no, I'm sorry, backwards. The MLB team had games left. The AAA season was over. And they sent him down to AAA. So you essentially you just ended his season early. You could have benched him. Could have kept him with the team, kept him with his brothers essentially, or the team that you're trying to develop here. Instead, you sent him home. What did you gain from that? Because now, this offseason, who's in front of the cameras? Who's MLB Network interviewing when it comes to discussing your organization? CJ Abrams. He is your guy. He's supposed to be your guy. You're developing him as your guy, and then you publicly humiliated him. Now you're kind of doing the right thing. You're surrounding him with veterans, right? You signed Paul DeYoung, you got Ahmed Rosario, you got these guys who kind of been there, done that. And you also traded for one of the better first basemen in the game in Nathaniel Lowe.
Mhm.
We know you're not going for it right now. Mackenzie Gore's your best pitcher. He's also young. They did sign your boy Mike Soroka. I'll bring that up just because you brought him up earlier. But what are you trying to do here? If you're the Nationals front office, are you just trying to send messages? Hey, we're in charge and you're not, or are you trying to build something? Because you're only doing one or the other with moves like that.
Well, first of all, I was only joking before. I think there is a lot to talk about here with the Nationals. I think I'm glad we segued over to Washington. Um, you know, at first, yeah, at first sight, it feels like there's not much here. It feels like it's just your classic rebuild, but there's a little more than what meets the eye. You know, as with Abrams, it looks like he took the end of last season pretty well, actually, because I'm hearing he walked into spring training with adding 10 pounds of muscle, and according to him, he feels like he got a little faster than he is. So,
Mm,
right, he took the offseason, used as motivation. Looks like he's become just honed his skills even a little more. Um, you expect him to be a part of this core, right? You expect him to join this core that already has Dylan Cruz and a couple of Mackenzie Gore, as you mentioned, a couple other good young pitchers as well. Signing of Lucas Sims, solid reliever, right? Nathaniel Lowe, that was an interesting trade. It weirdly feels like they're making these signings and trades just to trade them at the deadline. It feels like,
yeah, yeah.
which is kind of funny. I mean, but I think it is just your classic rebuild. But they got some fun names again. Dylan Cruz he's not there yet. He's not at the Paul Skeens, even though they were in the same draft, right? Ellie De La Cruz, right? That like tier of young talented player. That's why I don't feel like he's getting talked about enough. This is a
Right.
guy who could. I mean, he was supposed to go number one ahead of Skeens. I mean, this is a guy who could very well be a rookie of the year, if not. I mean,
You get catapult.
yeah, all
You
star.
get catapult. Look, and the sad thing is for a guy like Dylan Cruz is you did get drafted behind Paul Skeens, who's an anomaly, right? You can't look at what Paul Skeens has done and compare him to the rest of the draft class because one, how that even happened, the guy's work ethic and his ability is just out of this world. But we know that. We know that this is a once in a lifetime, once in a generation pitcher that's going to do that, right? At least what he did that rookie year. He was at LSU a year before, flies through the system, and the very next season he's pitching in the All Star game. Like we've never seen that, but that's not to say that that's going to keep going. I said it last week about Paul Skeens during our NL Central episode. Like he could very well not be that same pitcher this year. It could all stop here for Paul Skeens. The good thing for Dylan Cruz, that's the same thing that can be said for Paul Skeens, is you're developing in a pressure-free situation. right? Anytime I think about these young pitchers, I think about Jack Leiter over in Texas, who's coming into a team that's just won a World Series very shortly ago, and you're having to develop on a team that's going to be cutthroat because all they're going to be doing is chasing that trophy again, right? So now you've got to kind of fight for every inning, and it puts more pressure on your development. Where guys like Skeens and now Dylan Cruz, they've got some time. Now, I have seen the guys on like MLB Network say that their expectations of Dylan Cruz have kind of dipped. Why though?
Yeah. I don't think there's enough like press there isn't enough there to base an opinion based off to make an opinion based off that.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
Paul Skeens, you got
The
an
sample
entire
size is
season.
too small.
Paul Skeens, you have an entire season to judge, right? Okay, you'll have this sophomore slump, right? Can he replicate it? Dylan Cruz came up in September. So I
Right.
understand there's not enough evidence there to back up that claim. Um, and I think it's as good of a situation as he could be in, right? Because he's got absolutely no pressure, right? And it's not necessary. It's actually a pretty well run organization. I mean, Mike Rizzo is a very good general manager. I mean, the fact that they won their World Series in 2019 is still one of the greatest things that I've seen in sports in the past
Mm,
decade. Still to this
mm.
day, I think he ranks at least top three. That was a phenomenal run, and it was a
Yeah,
very
but I don't put that on a front office. I put that more on Davey Martinez. I feel like Davey Martinez spent that whole season pushing, pushing, pushing. It was stay in the fight all season long. Stay in the fight, just stay in the game, just stay in the game. You've got to recognize that you do have something special, right? This is kind of like AJ Hinch in Detroit last season. Like it's hard for most people to realize that you've got a good team when it doesn't look like it right away. And then you push, and you're like, guys, we just got to do this. That doesn't come from the general manager. That doesn't come from the front office. And so the reason why I brought up that Abrams thing, right? Because it's not just about CJ Abrams anymore when you do something like that. You do have Dylan Cruz. You have a young team. Your core is Josiah Gray, Mackenzie Gore, what's the outfielder's name that came up that last year? James Wood and
Mhm.
CJ Abrams. And now a guy like Dylan Cruz who's developing to come into the fold on that team. But then when you do something like you did to CJ Abrams, you send a message to all these young guys that there's now an added layer to your development, and it's you have to develop quickly as a adult, right? Where all you're trying to kind of focus on is your game. I got to get better. I got to get to a point where I can stay in this league because so many players just come up, go back down, right? And you don't want to be that. So now you add this whole thing of I also can't get in trouble because my team is not going to support me. They're going to cast me aside. They did it to the all-star shortstop. If I'm Dylan Cruz, if I'm James Wood, right? If I'm Mackenzie Gore, if I'm Josiah Gray, I look at that and I say, oh my God, I I gotta focus on more than just this game. And now you're gonna dig yourself as an organization, as a team, an even deeper hole with your young guys.
Listen, and I absolutely agree, and I think right, even still, right, that's still an even better situation to be in. That your manager is someone you could really trust. The guy who is, I remember he gets hired, and I think it was 2018. He replaced Dusty Baker, Davey Martinez, and he's still here. He's still here. He's a very well respected manager, coach. Right, he was with the 2016 Cubs actually back a couple about a decade now. It's crazy. That's almost a decade now. Very well respected baseball mind. And again, it's just a great situation to be in. And we got one more team to talk about in a couple minutes, but but two rebuilds in this division. And if I'm a fan, if I'm choosing to be a fan of either of those two teams, I'm choosing the Nationals all day because again, they have the
Yeah.
plan, they have the future, they have the baseball people. I
Mhm.
think I think Mike Rizzo is a good GM. I think he made plenty of great moves for that team in 2019. A lot of those veterans were guys he acquired.
Yeah.
Um, they gave a good offer to Bryce Harper. They gave a great offer to Soto. Those guys just didn't want to come back.
Anyone want to say?
Well-run organization. I think they're doing things right. I think there is a good future there, and honestly, this isn't your year, but you know what? Just keep playing, keep figuring out, build that core, and in a couple of years' time, who knows? Who knows what could happen?
Yeah. So moving on to the Marlins, who a couple years time passed, and now they're doing another a couple years time because this team is at the early stages of a rebuild. Now, what I don't think when I look at the Marlins, 62 and 100, quietly, I mean, there are a lot of teams that were so bad last year, and they just got lucky that the White Sox were exponentially worse. But what I don't see with the Marlins is how long of a rebuild is this? Because it was supposed to be short, especially considering you guys were just a playoff team a couple of years ago. And last deadline, you started the sell. You didn't like commit to it, right? It wasn't like the fire sale that the White Sox did. It was close, but you still held on to some pieces that you could have gotten back really good talent with, like Anthony Bender. You went and now you signed Cal Quantrill. Like there was a lot that you waited a little too long on. Now, Jesus Sanchez is still there. Sandy Alcantara is coming back. But still, this isn't remotely a good team. So what
No,
is the plan? If it was to sell, why didn't you go all the way with it? I get that Alcantara was on the uh, injured list, so you really can't sell him. But Jesus Sanchez could have gone. Anthony Bender could have gone. There were, I think they held on to, if I'm not mistaken, Jake Berger all the way through, and then he went to the Rangers this offseason, like, and he was hot for them. So Edward Cabrera. Just there's names that we've known from this Marlin organization as young talent that they held on to, but there's no real explanation as to why, and there's no real or actually easily visible finish line for a good team for Miami.
there's no direction.
Yeah.
And, you know, I again, like you mentioned those names, and I'm just thinking in my head, I'm like, it's just like a mash of all these just names of guys that were top pros.
Yeah.
I mean, there was another one, Yuri Perez,
Yeah. Yeah.
Sixto Sanchez, whatever happened to him? It does, like, you look at the Nationals and you look at Abrams and you look at James Wood and Cruz, and that's your core. There's more
Yeah.
guys to be added to that core. They have a direction. They have people there. They have a direction they're going in.
Yeah.
There's a reason to watch that team. This is just it's a mess. And
It's weird. You know what? One thing that's always gotten to me about this team, right? Derek Jeter goes and he's part of that buying group, and he becomes the GM, and he talked about it in his documentary too. But they go to the playoffs, and then the very next year he leaves. He walks. Jeter walks. We know Jeter. We grew up on Jeter. We know he's a winner. And the way that he made his statements, it kind of became obvious that the mission in Miami is not to win, it's to make money and sell tickets. Where are your ticket sales on this roster? Where is your big money on this roster? Like, if you told me, all right, you kept Giancarlo Stanton, right? Or I mean, those were Jeter moves, but if you told me you at least traded away these young guys for a big star that's gonna just bring money right away or sign somebody, fine. But this doesn't say that, and it hasn't said that for years. I mean, they made the playoffs, sure, but I'm pretty sure that was 2020.
yeah,
Yeah, so nobody was buying tickets anyway. So why didn't you capitalize off of that? I mean, you could have, you didn't, you haven't. It seems like you don't want to. So is there a future? Is the future of this franchise even in Miami, or do they need to move? Because when I look out west to Oakland, I don't think there were too many people that were like, yeah, Oakland, the Athletics have to move from there. Both of the Florida teams have been high on my list of teams that have to find a new home. Tampa obviously first because they have been a contender and have had empty stadiums in the playoffs, which is odd. I don't care what the team is or who's on the team. That's weird.
Yeah.
Seats empty behind home plate. That's weird in October. And then it's the Marlins because it's like, why not? What are you even doing there? The money's not there. I know for MLB and baseball as a whole, it's good to have a baseball team in Miami because you can play there all year long, and especially now that it's a dome. But you put so much into the stadium, you put so much into who's at the helm of things. But what are you doing about your roster? Like it's a legitimate question. It's not a rhetorical. Obviously, you don't have the answer, but what are we doing here?
Yeah. I have no idea. And I'll even take you a couple of years back, right? They had general manager Kim Ng, was the first
Yep.
woman general manager at Major League Baseball. I thought she was doing a fine job. I really didn't see any problem with anything she was doing. And within her first couple of years, she brings the team to the playoffs in 2022, or is it
Mhm.
2023 rather? Um,
Yep.
and she gets fired the next offseason. And now she's I forget his name, who's the GM now, but just I'm not saying he can't be the guy to do it, but it just feels strange. So either it's a bad baseball decision to fire her, or there's a problem and they had a disagreement behind the scenes. In which case, there's still probably organizational dysfunction, which not good either way. So there's
No.
a problem within this organization.
And you know what I think it is she was a Jeter hire, and she probably had the Jeter mentality, and Jeter walked. She had no more protection there to try to win and let it be what the organization actually wants to do. And now I think it's sort of become obvious. To me, it's obvious now. The Marlins do not care to win.
No.
They don't want to win. They don't want to, invest in players or build, right? They want a show. They want to be Los Angeles so bad. They want it to be an authentic supply of money and revenue. And the bad thing for Marlins fans is that you are in Miami, where, like I said, the World Baseball Classic is going to be in Miami. It's the best place to do it because Miami's much more diverse than any other city that could host a winter baseball game of international play. And Miami can do so much with that stadium. But Marlins baseball is what it was supposed to be intended for, and Marlins baseball is not where you're making any money if you're Miami. So if that's your whole intention, why doesn't the brain compute, or why doesn't the boardroom compute that maybe we should invest into this team, that winning sells tickets or big names or anything more than what you're doing now is going to make you more money?
I really have no answer. I don't.
Yeah.
It's one of the most puzzling situations in baseball. I mean, you go back, even was it almost 10 years ago now when they had Stanton and Yelich and Ozuna and Real Muto and all these guys, and
People forget that was one of the best teams in baseball.
all they needed was some pitching. All they
Yeah.
needed was some pitching, and the sky was the limit for that team. They decided to tear it up. Now that was when they hired Jeter. Okay, we bring in Jeter, as you mentioned. He tears the team up, has a nice rebuild. I mean, he gets some really good young talent, right?
Mhm.
I mean, they made that trade, Jazz Chisholm for Zach Gallen. Wasn't a good trade in the long run for them, but Jazz Chisholm was part of that team that went to the playoffs both of those seasons, 2020, 2022, 2023.
Yep.
Um, it was a product. They were building a product, and then they decided to tear it up, and now they have still no direction. And maybe listen, maybe 2 years from now, we'll be looking at this team and they'll be solid again. But the way the the way Marlins baseball seems to work is when things finally work out, they tear
Tear
it
it
up,
apart.
and it's just dysfunction, just pure
Yeah.
dysfunction. One of the
Yeah,
worst.
and I feel like they've always been like that. Like, even back in the days, they
Yeah,
win World Series, and then the next year, they just get rid of everybody.
exactly.
That was another thing Jeter even mentioned in his documentary. So, final thoughts on the NL East. For me, it is still Philly's division to lose,
Mm,
but it's the Braves that are gonna make the deepest run out of this division. So I think those 2 teams, I think Phillies win the division. I think the Braves are a wild card team, even though I do think they're the better team. But because of that, I think they make a run, a deeper run in October if everyone's healthy. At least the key guys are healthy. That's the way I think this goes. So for the Phillies, or for the East, Phillies take the division, but the Braves make the deeper run, and the Phillies early exit. What you think?
um, I think the Mets. I do. I know that's not what you're expecting, but I do think the Mets are gonna take it. I do.
Wow!
I think
I
they're
didn't expect that at
no.
all. Actually,
Listen, there's a reason I think they have pressure. I think they're a good team. I do. I listen, I understand the pitching concerns, but I would trust David Stern's pitching brain over most
Mhm.
people in baseball, if I'm being honest with
Right, but you're comparing. It's rotation versus rotation versus rotation. I don't give the Mets even remotely an edge.
you. But you also can compare lineups, and I think they got a better lineup than anyone in the National League East.
You think okay, you honestly think the
I
Mets
think they have
lineup
the
is better
deepest lineup. I think they have the deepest lineup.
than the Braves?
I think so, because 'cause they're not even fully healthy yet. And Olsen had a really down year, Eddie. I mean, you got Juan Soto, you got Lindor, Alvarez, Vientos was great in the
You got
playoffs.
Acuna
You
Jr.,
go
you
down the
got all
list,
these, and you got Austin Riley.
and you got Alonso, and you got Nimmo and
Alonso
McNeil.
had a down year,
He could bounce back.
but he's trending down though. That's the difference. Like he's been here, then here, then here, then here.
I don't know what to
They
tell
didn't
you.
even want to sign him.
I
They
think
didn't even want to sign him.
I'll tell you what. Again, and he still fell to them. Maybe it's not the best situation. I just I do feel like vibes are so high, and maybe that works out like converse like the other way for the Braves. Maybe not the vibes not being so high is good for them. I feel like the vibes being high for the Mets is good for them. I think they know that they're a team that expects to win. If they don't, they're not going to be so down, with themselves. But I think they believe that they can do it, and I think they can. I think the
Are you
rotation
gonna be
is a
at
little
the
deeper than
stadium with the newspaper articles that say "Believe"?
listen. Yeah, listen. That's all this team is. It's a bunch of gimmicks and bits, and now they actually have a good team that could actually do it. And it's not just riding a gimmick. You got to believe all the way to the
Well, what
playoffs.
if gimmicks is what works for them and this doesn't?
Listen. You're never gonna run short of gimmicks in Queens. They're always gonna find things to have fun, and they're always gonna find ways to have fun with that team. Because listen, they don't win the division. It's not like Mets fans have had it any worse or any better. Listen, I mean, they're not putting pressure on themselves.
Yeah.
I just think Juan Soto adds a lot of pressure, but they're gonna be fine with losing, and they're gonna be even more content with winning. I'm gonna predict as of now they finish, and I'm gonna say they get like 97 wins, maybe 96.
Whoa.
I feel like the Dodgers are gonna get like well over 100. Like I think this is, I think it's gonna be one of the, like I think a lot of wins are gonna be had in the National League. Like it's there's a lot more parity. I think there's a little more separation between the good teams and the bad. I think there's a lot of good
Mm,
teams. There's also quite a bit of bad teams. Marlins, Pirates, Rockies.
okay.
So
Look,
it's just a prediction. Listen,
I think it's gonna
it's,
be fun to watch how this plays out
listen.
for sure.
That's all you could
Uh,
say, right? It's gonna be. This is a guaranteed. This is gonna be a great three-team race, and that's
for
gonna be
sure, for
big.
sure. And then the Nationals are gonna surprise us and take it all.
That'd be amazing, man. I'd love
Listen, we thank everybody who joined us on TikTok and Instagram Live and YouTube as well. Next week, it's the American League East episode. You do not want to miss that one. Make sure you're following us on all our socials: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Subscribe on Spotify. Eddie Virgil, Chris Gambino. We will see you next week, everybody. Have a great afternoon.